Hello there, everybody. Welcome along. It's Saturday, and we don't usually do these on a Saturday, and I completely appreciate that. But we tried doing a live stream on Wednesday, and if you are watching, you will notice, or you will have watched, the complete car crash of internet issues and all sorts of problems going on. Thankfully, we have been able to reschedule with Rob Salkowitz to join us for take two of this particular stream. We are going to behave as though this is straight off the bat that we're doing this for the first time. We're going to possibly recap a couple of things that we got into on the Wednesday stream to the extent that we did. But as always, if you are watching now, whatever platform, it is an open forum. We're going to cover certainly the way that the convention and fandom industries have been affected by COVID, but also we're going to cover something that actually got announced pretty much while we were on air, which was a number of firings, or the second round of firings at DC Comics. So we're going to kind of touch on that as well. Any comments, any questions, as always, do jump in. It's all public and up and running on all the platforms, so we're pretty much good to go. So anything that you want to dive into, please do. Any questions? And the great thing about doing this stream as well, it means that I'm not rescheduling Rob down the line and messing up my episode numbering system. This is still season number 8, episode number 14, before we do Scotty Young tomorrow. So it's all come round. It's all kind of evened out. So that's rather cool. Hopefully you've been enjoying the Thought Bubble content as well. That's been particularly entertaining to keep an eye on. We've got Designercon, which is happening as we speak. I just dived in on the Patrick Ballesteros stream. He's doing great guns on selling his wares. So pretty much at the moment, the virtual con landscape is nicely thriving. But we're going to get into all sorts of bits and pieces when it comes to the business and the infrastructure of fan culture, and that's what we're going to certainly cover for the majority of today. Stick around. This is going to be an interesting show. Talking Con, take 2. Hello there, everybody, and welcome along to Talking Con, a cup of tea with an Englishman in San Diego. My name is Leonard Sultana, and every time we go live on the show, it's to talk about Comic-Cons, con culture, and all of the fun and games that we get to enjoy at those events when we get to see them running, which means we're also covering the culture of virtual conventions, which have taken their place in the age of COVID. This is a take 2 of a stream that we were trying to do on Wednesday. Due to technical issues, it kind of all went a little bit sideways. But thankfully, we've been able to reschedule with our special guest who's joining us for the next 45 minutes or so, 45 to an hour, however long we can keep him talking, because he's always entertaining to get into discussion with. We have Rob Salkowitz joining us. Hello there, Rob. How the devil are you, sir?
I am terrific. Great to check back in after we were so rudely interrupted.
Yeah, that wasn't fun. It's got to be said. I was trying every single solution to hand to try and get it working, and technology was fighting me every step of the way. It was so frustrating. But if anything, it's kind of serendipity. Things have kind of worked out because while we were on air, we did have a number of announcements that came out literally, I think, as we went live. So we can kind of fold that into the discussion and the conversation as well. Like I say, we've got virtual conventions happening across the globe at the moment. I know that we've got Indie Digicon, which is celebrating let me get this right, independent creators from Ireland. So we've got that event taking place. We've got the massive event that's taking place with Thought Bubble. Obviously, that is one of the biggest comics-related events that takes place here in the UK, operating in the digital space. They have been partnered with San Diego Comic-Con for the last couple of years. This was the first year they kind of collaborated in advice on how to run a virtual convention, and how you can definitely see shadows of what they're doing with Thought Bubble, with the way that they did Comic-Con at home. And indeed, we've got Leanne D who's watching at the moment. I'm sad because I was supposed to be in the UK right now for Thought Bubble. Yes, safe to say, I think we all would love to have been jetting off and enjoying events across the globe. Just to recap with yourself, Rob, whereabouts are you based? Because you are, I believe, Seattle.
I'm in Seattle. That is correct.
Right. So we kind of touched on this. I know that we may be rehashing on a couple of the topics that we talked about on Wednesday, but let's just recap about what Seattle's situation has been in the age of COVID over the course of the summer. What's it been like for yourself?
So Seattle was the epicenter of the first outbreak of COVID in the United States. So we got it first, and we have sensible local authorities who, you know, got on top of things fairly quickly. So after that initial set of panic, it's been fairly good here. I mean, we've been under lockdown. Our local businesses have suffered very sadly. My own local comic store went out of business over the summer because they just couldn't handle, because the rents here are very high, and so independent businesses in particular that can't get foot traffic are going to suffer. It's kind of shaped up it was looking a lot better 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now things are back off the edge of the cliff, and I think that we may be facing another lockdown in the next week or so if things don't get better. So it's it's up and down like everywhere else.
Sure. I mean, I think back in a couple of years ago, I was talking to several people about how industries and businesses need to evolve and change, and I was particularly craven about it. I was saying things like "evolve or die" was kind of the flippant, off the cuff remark. But now it's just, we're seeing businesses, like you say, really taking a massive brunt of this. Admittedly, those that are adapting to like mail order, to doorstep delivery, that kind of thing, those are seeing some kind of olive branch and some way of getting through the situation. But then you have, like you say,
I mean, the last time the comics industry had this kind of a catastrophe, it was self-inflicted, right? I mean, it was stores over-ordering, it was catering to speculators, it was issues internal to the business, and you could rightly look in the mirror if your business was bad and say, that was on me, those were bad decisions that I made. What's happening here is, systemic, and that if you're in a situation where you've got a good location, high rent, a senior, well-paid staff, that and you made those kind of decisions, you were well merchandised and you had all kinds of stuff in a well lit, like you invested in your store, those are the people that are getting screwed harder than the people that didn't. So it's almost like that your good decisions as an entrepreneur during ordinary times redounded not to your benefit. And yeah, it's good to be adaptive, it's good to be able to sell stuff online, but that's not the magic bullet for everybody. And if you're locked into high costs, that's ultimately going to be more of a problem. And if you had followed the advice that was prevalent in the industry in 2017, 2018, 2019, which is turn your stores into a social hub, do gaming nights, do stuff that diversifies so that you're not just doing transactions, you're doing community and in-person experiences. Again, those are the kind of investments that really come to bite you in the butt in a situation where you just can't have people in close proximity in your store.
Absolutely. The other thing that we certainly what we're going to get into today is the business of pop culture, because that is something that you are particularly well versed in. If you can give everyone, for people who may not know your work, I mean, it's great to have you on. It's great to have you back. We've had you on a couple of times, but for those perhaps that don't know who you are and what your background is, a little bit of an introduction, please, to yourself, Rob Salkowitz.
Sure. So I am a writer and sayer of things about comics. Currently, I am the senior media and entertainment writer for Forbes. I also write for Publishers Weekly and for ICB2, which I'm sure your listeners know is the trade publication for the comics and gaming business. Prior to that, I wrote a book called Comic Con and the Business of Pop Culture. I had written several other business books before, but I wrote that one. And now I'm the guy who wrote a book about Comic Con. So I've managed to use that to unite my professional interest and my long-term personal interest in comics. I also teach at the University of Washington here in Seattle, and I teach a class in comics as communication platform. So I've been doing more stuff on the academic side as well.
Yeah, because certainly one thing that has been fun to see over the course of the year when we've seen virtual conventions happening is yourself showing up at virtual cons as a host, as a very engaging a steerer of conversation. What's been your take on virtual conventions in terms of audience reach? Because I think that's the general response that I've been seeing from people who have been putting on cons. Certainly when you look at people have really studied the numbers, for example, of Comic-Con at home, and people have been looking at some very niche panels that would have been put on by Comic-Con International, where they would have been put into a room where they would have had an audience of anywhere like 50, 80, 120, something like that, relatively small. They're getting tens of thousands of views online, and people are seeing and engaging with these topics. From yourself and your own perspective, what's it been like to be part of this virtual convention revolution this year?
Well, I mean, I think that it's a couple of things. It's like, as we both know, for every one person that's lucky enough to be at Comic-Con in person, there's 10 people with their faces pressed to the glass, that can't get in. And, when you're online, you don't have that physical limitation. So I think all of the people that might have been interested in all of the things that go on at Comic-Con. And then, of course, when you're there, even if there's one thing you've got circled in the program, well, there's 50 other things going on at the same time. And it's always a triage to say, well, like that one sounds interesting, but I've heard that before, or I really want to see this other creator. And when it's asynchronous and you can just go and binge watch one after another, you don't have to make those kind of choices. You don't have to make the hard decisions or the big investment of going to Comic-Con. You don't have that fear of missing out, like even, if you're sitting in a panel room and there's stuff going on in the exhibit hall. So I think those dynamics work to the benefit of it. I think we were able to curate really good conversations. I did a panel around the legacy of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which if we had actually done that panel at Comic-Con, we've had to do it behind chicken wire, I think, because people would have been throwing things at, that's an issue that tends to elicit some strong opinions in fandom. And we were able to have a civil conversation among, recent biographers of both Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, to present their points of view. And then, it goes up on YouTube and we get some feedback on that. So, I think there were some good opportunities. There was also, I was part of a panel on teaching comics in higher education, which again, as you were saying, at San Diego, that would be like in the upstairs in room like 22D or something off in the corner. And it would get the, 50, 75 hardcore people that go for the academic programming. And this way, I think it got out to a lot of people. It was a great conversation. Paul Levitz and Karen Green from Columbia and people like that were involved. Ed Cato organized the panel. And I think that got, last I checked, was like 5,000 or 6,000 views, which is, ballroom 20, for numbers for San Diego. So I think that end of it definitely worked out pretty well.
I mean, we're going to be talking more about the kind of the layoffs element of DC Comics in a bit, but the conversation has come up this week when it comes to comic conventions and virtual cons, because it definitely came as part of the conversation, as the package of the whole conversation about what DC are planning for the future in terms of their outlay, in terms of their engagement with fans. we've seen DC fandom. We've seen what you can do when you get yourself a couple of good editors, someone with a working knowledge of After Effects, and you get this very slick presentation. And it worked particularly well. If anything, there was the pros and cons of having the panels and the content available literally from one site, from their own player on their own server, which meant everyone was diverted. The eyeballs were in one particular spot, and it was all contained. The content wasn't available past that weekend. It was you literally had to be there to engage with it. There's the cons of that. That's the pros of it. The cons, obviously, is that the conversation is very much limited to that weekend. DC fandom.
You're talking about the DC fandom virtual experience. Yeah.
At which point, then, the conversation has been this week that DC fandom will now be the model for DC moving forward when it comes to their convention interaction. That they would not probably attend something like San Diego Comic-Con, they wouldn't attend New York Comic-Con, they wouldn't attend Emerald City or whatever, because they have no need. They can then just focus their attentions on this one weekend. Is that something that you feel that they would do, or do you feel that they would kind of stick to what they're doing at the moment, but then focus their energies on DC fandom?
So it's two levels to that question. One is like on the general strategy of what they should be doing as a brand, and the other is what they will be doing because of their particular business orientation right now. But I mean, I think that I've been observing this for a long time, that I feel like the rise of San Diego caught the popular culture, media, entertainment industry kind of by surprise. They didn't expect that this independently run, nonprofit, weird niche event would instantly come to occupy the center of the entire media entertainment universe. And so, you know, they were all being kind of reactive to that. And I think that if Marvel or DC or Hasbro or Disney, you know, or any of the big entertainment brands, you know, Sony and Microsoft on the gaming side, all of that stuff had their druthers, they would much rather have a controlled experience where they set the agenda, they present their stuff. They don't have to share the stage or the exhibit hall with their deadly competitors. They don't have to appear at even footing with everybody, because, you know, that's not their mindset. They want to be in charge and they want to set this up. But the fact is that Comic-Con came in and it took over and it seized that territory. And if you came in lately with, you know, later with a, you know, with a D23 or something like that, then you were basically saying to the fans, we want to give you a more limited experience. We only want to show you our stuff. We want to treat you as a marketing test bed and a captive audience for our brands and our licensors. And we're going to charge roughly the same as what Comic-Con is doing, and, you know, but we're just going to make it less cool for you. And, you know, the fans are rightly thinking, well, all other things being equal, I'd rather be at a show where I can see all of my favorite stuff and I don't have to choose. I don't have to want, you know, it's like, well, it's like I like Marvel Universe, but I also like Doctor Who or Supernatural, or, you know, so why not go to a place that has all of the big tent? I think that has been very frustrating to the business side for a while, that they have to play nice, and also that because of Comic-Con is a nonprofit and they don't have a board that's responsive to the same supply and demand pressures as the commercial industries, they can't throw their money around in the same way. I think Comic-Con is like, come if you want, don't come if you don't want. I mean, I think that they take it in stride that is a little unnerving to people that are used to getting their way by pushing a large pile of money over the edge of the counter. So, you know, I don't think that, the long way is, I don't think that the San Diego Comic-Con model has been a comfortable one for that side of the industry for a while. They've been looking at ways to get that, but they can't chip away at that fan model as long as San Diego Comic-Con is there occupying that space in the middle. The fact that they're
and then in 2020 it's not there.
It's not there, and so all of Comic-Con's advantages of, you know, exclusivity and capturing media attention and all of that stuff are negated in a virtual world. They're offering programming, they're putting their branding out there, they're selling their merchandise, they're doing the, you know, ante at the table to remain in the conversation, but they don't have any of the advantages that they bring to bear in the market anymore. So a Warner Brothers can roll up, who is an entertainment company. They're not an events company. They're an entertainment company. And now we're playing on their ground. Now we're putting up videos on distributing to a mass market and marketing and getting people in and showing production value and all of that stuff. And that's suddenly where they've got the advantage. And Comic-Con was sending you a package of stuff saying, here's how to make a decent YouTube video. And here are the, we're going to slap this in our template and put it up on YouTube and call it good. And that, bless their hearts, they're really good at what they do, but that's not what they do. So, the balance of power shifted. All of these people that went and saw Fandom, which I didn't do personally, I think my wife checked out a couple of the panels and said they were really good and enjoyable. And she's been doing a lot more of the virtual conventions than I have, so I kind of rely on her opinions about what's working.
I suspect, yeah, so it's been suspected being flipped between myself and you, because for myself, I've been swallowing as much of the virtual convention content as I could, and Caroline has just gone, if it's not in a room with my friends enjoying something in person, I am not interested at all. So didn't see a single panel, didn't see a single piece of content, hasn't seen anything from this year. I think there's been a little bit, a bit of the flip from myself to you. But
the thing about the Fandom is that everybody that signed up for that, now they've got a mailing list, they've got a basis for kicking off a live event. So they got to do a soft launch where there was no expectations of how good it was going to be. And I think people came into it and they thought, oh, this is cool. I would take a flyer on this in person. Maybe if I can't get a badge to Comic-Con next year, this would be an acceptable substitute. And so they're in a way better position to launch a live event if they want to. So I think strategically, if Warner Brothers or AT&T Warner Media or whatever they're calling it now is interested in doing that, they have a much better platform in 2021 than they did in 2019 for that. The larger question is, what does Warner Media want DC to be inside of their larger entertainment brand? Do they still even see that as a comics thing, or is it a lifestyle brand? Is it, in fact, what they want with DC more appropriately presented in a, entertainment brand forum as opposed to a comic convention? And, I think that nobody knows exactly what their business moves with DC Comics meant, other than the fact that they probably saved themselves some money on salary. But personally, I believe that this is, another step in a direction that they've been signaling for the last year and a half about what they want the future of DC to be, as very, very different from what we old-time DC fans have always understood DC to be.
I'm also very curious. I mean, Andrew Dickinson's bringing up a very good point, which I'll dive into in a second, but also the equation to D23. I can imagine that the people at Warner Brothers and at DC Comics have been paying very close attention to Disney and D23 as its own separate convention, its own separate event, because then it gives them a sense of how big an audience there is, what kind of revenue they can generate, how much it actually costs to put on a very focused, localized event for their own brand. I can imagine they've been paying attention to that model very carefully.
I mean, Disney knows a thing or two about live events, so it's like I think they're in a little bit of a different, set environment than Warner Brothers or Warner Media is for that. So anyway, I think that it's a much more natural thing for Disney to create a branded in-person experience, because they have the in-house expertise and they've got long years of knowledge and training and everything about how to do that. So, and I think their objectives for it at the outset were a little bit different also. Like I don't think they were looking to be a Comic-Con killer. I think Disney's brand on its own is well understood and distinct from comics culture in certain ways that they.
I went to D23 and I went to the year that it was the weekend before San Diego Comic-Con, when everyone was just thinking, right, D23 is going to be a Comic-Con killer. No. So as somebody who went there, and you suddenly realize, especially as somebody who is a fan of Marvel, is a fan of the films and whatever, I felt like an outsider. I felt just as somebody who attended it, as somebody who's a fan of Disney, the theme parks, the Fantasia crowd, there was a definite vibe of, okay, those Marvel people are, those Comic-Con people are they're treading in our house. So there was a definite vibe of D23. So I definitely get the idea of what Disney. It's a different vibe entirely. It's a different crew. But like I say, I think it's more the administration, the audience that is drawn to that event. I think that's what WB may have looked at. Andrew's what the point that he was bringing up was the ancillary costs are a lot less for D23 though, and that because it's focused. It's not only that, but it's local. It's to them. It's over the road, literally. So that I can understand, and not only that, but I can imagine as well. There is this real sense of the talent that go there are kind of going under the umbrella of Disney. There's a little bit more of a happy clappy vibe. It's a little more. It's less than you are being paid, dragged to the Comic-Con to promote your wares. Whereas with D23, there was that vibe that, okay, we are in safe grounds, as it were.
Also, if you look at the Venn diagram of the people who go to D23 and go to Disneyland afterwards, it's probably a total just a circle. So I'm, like Disney,
that's something I learned. They know how to queue.
Yeah.
Whereas, oh, hang on a second. We lost you there for a second. Oh, not again.
We're cursed. This is maximum 2020. Oh, I can see you now. You're good.
Bear with me, Rob.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Did I freeze again?
No, just briefly, and then I can see and hear you fine.
Okay. Well, I'll have to look at the playback and see how it goes. Sorry, very quickly to repeat what you said just then.
What did I say just then?
That's what I think. I didn't hear it. That was the thing.
I mean, I was just talking about how Disney is very good at getting people to cross merchandise. So it's like if you show up to D23, you're going to go to Disneyland, you're going to buy a ton of stuff in the Disney shop and everything. So whatever it costs for them to put on D23 comes out in the wash because they're getting so much more extra business out of the back end of it. It's not just a doesn't have to be a self-standing event. Sure.
I think the thing that was lost was something I was saying about queues was certainly at Comic-Con. When I've attended, there's got to be direct marshalling. There's got to be kind of people, and there's got to be a way of controlling that amount of lines. With D23, it was literally dots on the floor, and they knew how to line because they across the road. They do this on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, it was interesting to see the contrast was interesting. Let's go through a couple of the questions because Andrew is someone who's very interested in this conversation. He's got plenty of things to dive into, and we'll then dive into the business of the virtual conventions and the way that the comic conventions have had to adapt. So I think we're definitely talking about D23 and fandom here. Andrew's talking, would it take Marvel, Warner Brothers, Sony all passing on San Diego Comic-Con to break the mystery of San Diego Comic-Con?
I mean, maybe, but the advantage of San Diego Comic-Con is that, speaking as a member of the entertainment media, we're a lazy and cowardly and superstitious. Right? We like to have one place to go to get all of this news at once. And if there's 4 or 5 different events that you have to go to get the stories about what's coming up, then nobody's going to get that spotlight as brightly. So, the economy of scale that's grown up around San Diego, and the fact that you've got all of the announcements happening at once, you've got all the star power focused on San Diego for a weekend, you've got this wonderfully photogenic background of tens of thousands of people in costume, in the glorious San Diego sunlight as the backdrop to these shots, to these stand-up shots, where they're talking about these announcements. They're bringing on the A-list stars in front of that background. That's, you know, it generates something like 10 billion media impressions over the weekend. That's, you know, in social media terms, that's golden. And also all of the influencers that are there that are spreading this stuff out through word of mouth, the media value of having one event for Comic-Con, even if you have to share that with all of your competitors, is going to be really hard to replicate. So unless they don't want that anymore, unless they feel like, okay, we don't really need that one center of attention, you know, we don't need a Sundance Film Festival, we don't need a South by Southwest, or whatever that one main event is to focus all that spotlight, then the hell with it, we'll do our own thing. I think that's too tempting for everybody to collude and say, mutual boycott, San Diego is on its own. I don't think they're going to do that. It's like game theory. It's you know, the prisoner's dilemma, where one side folds and the other side doesn't, and then they end up winning everything on the table. And nobody wants to be that. Nobody wants to be to allow your competitors to have the stage all to themselves.
Sure. Okay. So, like I say, it's an interesting object lesson. It's an interesting discussion with DC fandom, but it is a unique one in that it's focusing very much on its own individual core business, and what they're going to do with it is something else entirely. When it comes to the business of fandom, sorry, not fandom, fandom, then we're talking about conventions organizers that are attempting to, or have attempted to, translate what they do in the physical space into virtual conventions. Some have done it reasonably well. For example, we have seen Mainframe do a great job with Baltimore Comic-Con. That has been very ambitious. And not only that, but they were one of the first ones out of the gate, to be honest. They used very similar platform to what we're using right now, which is StreamYard. It's a very low maintenance for guests setup, in that you mail out a link to a guest. The guest comes on at a specific time. It's all done very, very easily. And it's the platform that Mainframe have used. For myself, the 3 tiers of a virtual convention are also kind of the 3 tiers for a physical one. The panel content, so going into a room and taking on board any information in that regard, the interactions with talent, and also the retail aspect in terms of those on the other side of the table. Some of the conventions have got it right. Some of them still quite haven't cracked that. Certainly that third nut is definitely the one that's been the definite issue. Which ones do you feel have managed to get the balance as close as possible in this land of no conventions and a virtual convention landscape?
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think that ReedPop has done very well with the programming side. I think that their programs are very compelling. I think GalaxyCon was one of the ones that was actually, GalaxyCon was first out of the gate, and they actually built the platform that was since adopted by ReedPop. So they do not only really good panels, but they're really good at monetizing the celebrity interaction part on the back end. And they do, you know, you can do meet and greets, you can do, you know, the sort of super, almost as like a super photo op, because you get to keep the video clip, you get to interact with the talent privately for a while. You can get mementos of that. You know, you can print out your screen grabs on a T-shirt, and you know, like there's all kinds of ways that you can do that in a virtual setting. And for the fans that are in it for that part of it, you know, people have been trying to cordon off that side of the conventions for a while because there's so much money there. It consumes an awful lot of the emphasis of the organizing of the physical conventions, and it really doesn't add anything for the attendees that are not into that. So you've got all of this celebrity photo ops and stuff like that off to the side in these giant lines, and there's people that are there just for that are spending, if you're spending $500 on a, you know, on a photo op with the, you know, with the Star Trek cast or something, that's $500 that you're not spending at retail then and there in the convention floor. So there are parts of the business that would benefit from being able to say, look, we're going to do this side of it online. which is more convenient and cheaper for the talent. It's more convenient and cheaper for the organizers. It cuts out the middleman of these photo booth operators who own the data and take a pretty big chunk for, you know, a fairly routine service. So, I mean, I think that that's an area of the business that people have had their eye on trying to consolidate for a while, but there's been no, you know, it's been hard to say.
There's been no impetus to do it.
Yeah, doing it online is not better than doing it in person. But now that we've been doing it online and people are used to it, maybe that's going to give that a leg up. So they've been doing a good job.
Do you think pricing has been competitive in that regard? Because the one thing I saw when I saw Repop, when I saw a number of virtual conventions doing the interactions, I felt the pricing was just a little bit too much. It felt like someone was trying to make up the lost revenue.
For the virtual conventions or for the Yeah, I mean, you know, it's what the market will bear, and there's people. If you know, if people pay it, they'll pay it. I mean, that's you know, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if you're not having to pay to fly the talent there first class and put them up and assign them a staff person and do all of the stuff that goes with, you know, talent management at a convention, there's an enormous savings there. But again, a lot of these companies have to keep people on payroll because they don't want their organizational capabilities, you know, to vanish, so that when we do get live conventions back, they don't want to have to go out and rehire and retrain a bunch of people. But unfortunately, that means that you've got a bunch of people that are sitting there on staff with nothing to do, and you got to pay them. So they're in a tough spot. I mean, I feel bad for the people that are in that business, because again, this was not of their making. This wasn't like a cyclical thing where we got oversaturated and, you know, a bunch of cons got shaken out because they were badly run. This was like a extinction level, you know, meteor hitting the earth, and you know, there's nothing that, and it punishes the good along with the bad. And you don't want to be in a situation where the people that know how to do good shows are locked out of the industry because they got washed out in this crisis, and then the people that come back are the people that can do it for the lowest bid, because that's going to mean that you know, it's going to set the entire industry back quite a bit if they don't have that institutional knowledge to be able to put on shows once we flip the switch back on again.
Speaking of which, what do you feel is going to be the balance between the virtual convention aspects and the physical convention? Not just in terms of the putting out of panel content and kind of the representation of an online presence once we have a physical convention back. What do you think it's going to be like in terms of talent that is just going to turn around and say, well, why don't we just Skype it into a big screen? What do you think the online kind of equilibrium is going to be like?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at this purely from the fan side, that I think we're missing a component of these conventions, which is really important, which is the interpersonal connections and the sort of serendipity. I think that a large number of professionals attend conventions not just to, you know, make money selling their stuff and talk about their latest projects, but also to meet, you know,
get out of the basement.
Editors, I mean, even fans and people that are aspiring to get into the industry, having that oxygen of you know, and being able to run into people at the bar and talk about your projects. I mean, if you think about the number of great comic projects that came out because a writer and an artist happened to run into each other at a convention and realized that they were just the perfect match for a particular thing. That's what we're being deprived of this year, is, you know, the fruits of all of those, you know, just random encounters. It's really hard to replicate online. The only place that it even tried to do it, as far as I can tell, was Lightbox. We talked about them in the abortive previous episode, but the thing about Lightbox is that, yes, they're a consumer-facing show if you're a fan of animation and illustration, but it's really a trade show, and it has an educational component. So their panels were a lot of how-to stuff and less about, like, you know, meet the artist and talk about stuff. It's more like, you know, here's how to do authentic-looking digital watercolors or whatever, and you watch a exhibition of that. But then behind the scenes, they had like an appointment system where everybody that was logged into everybody that was registered to the convention could put their name on lists and put up their resume, and you could go because the first edition of that show that was in person in 2019 turned out to be a gigantic job fair for people that wanted to get into animation, video games, illustration, all of that. And they didn't want to lose that component to it. I think in the future, that unless the bigger fan shows can have something like that, both on the fan side, because fans love to meet up, and also on the professional side, so that you can have that professional networking, it's never going to, if you can have the opportunity to safely get together in person, that is always going to be the preferred option, even if it's a cost, even if it's a pain in the ass. That's going to be preferred for that reason. Sure.
Andrew's brought up a question, he's brought up a comment first about Gen Con Online. It was fun and you could interact with the streams. I think that's one, like I was talking about the 3 tiers, but certainly for myself, the one element that needs to be addressed and really work for a virtual convention is that live interaction. It was something that was severely missing from San Diego Comic-Con's panels, in that the comments were locked. There really was just the panels going out and transforming from unlisted to public. The videos then just went out. There was no real kind of dialogue with the conversation ongoing in the comments, because the comments were locked. Other conventions have gone the other way. Obviously, like we had said, we've talked about Mainframe. Mainframe very much are about the interaction with the guests and with the attendees. People are watching, and they're very much about the Q&A discussion, which is their take on it. I think that people are still trying to work out a way, certainly if you were getting to a very large convention experience like New York Comic Con. So we're talking the Repop metaverse model. Then it's talking about, then we're talking moderation. Then we're talking someone going into the Q&A to take out the detritus of comments. So that's a whole other aspect. But he also mentions about this, and this is about the one-to-one aspect of it. I mentioned Omaze on Wednesday. Do you think they try and go and catch the interaction side of cons? I'm sure Rob's got thoughts on this, but for myself, Omaze, I mean, for myself, Omaze have a certain brand styling, in that they are about the charitable aspect of their business. They are raising money for charitable works. Yes, they can do and promote these one-to-one interactions where you meet the fans, meet the guests, and whatever. And yes, that is an aspect of the virtual convention experience now. But I think they deal more in the charitable aspect of it. And I think if they shifted away from that, then they would lose what makes Omaze Omaze. Thoughts, Rob?
I have no thoughts. I'm not familiar with their stuff.
Okay. Basically, it's an organization which a celebrity can go to and say, right, I want to raise money for building a school in Africa. If you buy a ticket, and you can buy one for $5, you can go into a raffle to go out for a meal with me, and we'll go out for an evening. People then can buy 100 tickets, 200 tickets, 500 tickets, etc. And the money that goes to the charity. Someone gets goes to a premiere with Tony Stark or something. That's what Omaze is. It's a great idea, but I think if they shifted what they did and tried to do like the one-to-one interaction and sold that, then I think they would take that charitable aspect of it, and I don't think that would be what they wanted to do. And yeah. The other thing then is about we talked about the way that they could see a balance of the physical convention and the virtual convention. This, at the end of the day, also means that conventions have to come back. We're looking at 2020 being a complete wash. And we're looking at the start of 2021 as when that could be the kickback off of a new normal. I know that you have taken into consideration the recent announcement of a possible vaccine for COVID. which could alleviate some of the stress. But we are seeing ever increasing numbers, certainly in the US, certainly here in the UK as well, as the second wave really takes off. And we're going to have a very hard winter indeed. We would usually be looking at something like C2E2 and Emerald City at the beginning of the year, around the February-March time, as kind of like the kicking off of the larger convention. Obviously, you have the smaller ones, but that's when the major convention season kicks off. What do you feel is the landscape of conventions? When do you feel that we could be safely looking at conventions coming back in 2021?
I mean, I'm very encouraged by the vaccine news. I've been watching the announcements about the developments of it. I think that the distribution of it and production and everything is still a question mark, but I feel like the scientific breakthrough is promising enough that we can really start thinking in terms of, certainly in the second half of 2021, that, you know, that as people become vaccinated and feel more confident about being out in public, that could definitely be there. But as with several things that are happening in the United States right now, that the tunnel is getting darker before the light appears. So, you know, I mean, that's tough. As I wrote about in Forbes on, I guess, Wednesday when we spoke, so I was covering the ReedPop announcements that they have secured physical locations and, you know, accommodations for San Diego. You know, that's the ICV2 post, but then they're going to be doing Emerald City in early December, and then a week later, C2E2 in Chicago in December of 2021. And when I talked to ReedPop, they acknowledged that that's not ideal timing, but the problem is that every event, yeah, sorry in advance for the Forbes.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the fight is awful. That so many shows across the spectrum, you know, trade shows and like boat shows and garden shows and all this stuff that takes up space in these convention centers is doing the same thing. They've canceled their 2020 shows. They're scrambling for bookings at the end of 2021. So even the big pop culture shows have to take what they can get. And this is what they could get, so this is what they took. If it starts looking like we'll be able to go back in midsummer and those dates start opening up over the summer, I think it's possible that they would rethink those plans if they can, if it's logistically possible. It's just there's a huge amount of lead time. Also, ReedPop acknowledges that it's not ideal to have the shows that are traditionally the season starters that late in the year, because then you don't want to do the 2022 edition in March, having just had one in December. So I think it's going to take at least 1 or 2 cycles for that to regularize. And what you might see is Emerald City 2022 in June, and then that'll give it enough time for the next year, or, you know, in September or August. You know, it's like it'll take it at least a year for them to find their feet to become those shows that are the start of the year again. And then also, you know, there's the additional issue of getting people to Chicago in the middle of December, which most people wouldn't do on a bet. But you know what? If you can make a show in Chicago work in February, you can probably do it in December. It doesn't make any difference. And there will be so much pent-up demand at that time that I think fans, you know, all over the country will be breathing a sigh of relief to do it. So, you know, I mean, they're playing the hand they're dealt. I'm glad that they have dates on the calendar. It gives their partners something to look forward to, gives their staff something to look forward to. Certainly it gives fans something to look forward to. And there's plenty of time for them to work through the uncertainties and figure out what they need to do to make it right.
We talked about briefly on the Wednesday before, and I think it was about this point where the conversation kind of sailed off the tracks. And it was about that concertining of the certainly the ReedPop shows. The idea of having the shows happening back to back that's first of all a rather bold decision to make, but I suspect that was more the availability of location. And okay, you're shaking your head.
Well, they're both regional magnets, so you know, I mean, that unlike New York Comic Con, and even New York Comic Con draws primarily from the East Coast, and it gets us some overlap, at least the work that I've done on it on their audience in the last couple of years says to me that that's majorly a super regional or a gigantic regional show that gets some international traffic, unlike San Diego, which is a genuinely international event. But C2E2 is mostly Midwestern United States. It's a destination show for some people, but if you live, anywhere in that 300-mile radius around Chicago, that's your show. And likewise, Emerald City is for the Northwest. I mean, if you are, I would say, west of Minneapolis and north of San Francisco, that's your show. But that's a pretty big chunk of territory, and it's not, it doesn't overlap with that. So it's going to be a big issue for the organizers, because they're going to have to, this year, Emerald City was scheduled for 2 weeks after C2E2, and that was kind of a sprint. So God help these poor people that have to do it. Hopefully they've got their teams rested and ready to go. And then any exhibitors that's going to try and do both shows, like the Tower of T-shirts guy or whatever, look, they do a show a week anyway. It doesn't make any difference. They're probably set up for it. So, those are going to be the only issues.
Sure. And then you look at the fact that, I mean, you touched on it briefly just then about the fact that the schedule date would be sort of like just a few months after the year. Do you feel that those dates are going to shift more into the summer, at which point you start really getting into other convention, mixing in with other big events as well? And whereas where they are traditionally, they stand alone. They have a very determined audience, and the fandom knows where they are in the calendar. When it starts mixing into the later on in the year, that's when things get interesting.
Look, I mean, the situation that we're in right now is so dire that I think the logistical problems that will arise with the resumption of live events look like small beer right now compared to.
True. Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think they'll work it out. ReedPop is a big company. They've got a whole, not just in the United States, but they've got shows all over the world that are being impacted by this, that they have to juggle. I mean, they have to do a show in Seoul, South Korea, and in, Mumbai, and, like all of these places, in addition to their schedule of US shows, and all of that stuff has been screwed up. I mean, it's a nightmare, but it's better to have a nightmare of how are we going to do all of these shows in the limited amount of time than, oh shit, we don't have any shows to do, and we have to keep paying our people, and we're doing these online events that are, that's the issue now, I think.
Sure. I mean, it says it on the actual sites as well for both C2E2 and for Emerald City that yes, we'll be coming back for these dates. This is when we're going to be doing these shows, but they also very much are promoting the Find the Metaverse, which was obviously the New York Comic Con and MCM event, which they've ran. It wasn't as big a success, and I think it was also the fact that it was coming off the back of DC Fandom. That did suck up a lot of the energy and the juice of that particular the virtual convention landscape. With Metaverse, it's still something that is evolving and is still growing. Sorry, I thought I heard something there.
It's a phone is ringing in the background.
Oh, fair enough. So I think there's definitely something they can learn from, and something they can develop. It's the fact that they have spent so much obvious time, money, and effort into making Metaverse as big as it can be. I don't think they're just going to let that investment just stop. And I think certainly for next year, you're going to be seeing more of what Metaverse can be.
Well, don't forget, ReedPop last year made some investments in esports networks and video gaming stuff that turned out to pay off really well. Like that side of their business actually ended up doing, is doing great. And so, and also it gives them some competencies in doing some online and virtual stuff that they didn't have before. So what seemed kind of incidental at the time and just them sort of grabbing up something because it was available turned out to be a smart play for them.
Sure. Okay, so that's the actual fandom. Fandom. I keep saying fandom. I can't help myself. That's the fandom and the pop culture celebration side of it. But then it's a case of the content as well, because it is something that you study. It's something that you are well versed in the business of pop culture. We'll start with something that Andrew's bringing up, and certainly with terms of films. I'm looking forward to the conversation I'm going to be having with the editor-in-chief of Den of Geek in a couple of weeks' time. We've already seen that Disney are moving their WandaVision show into next year. We've heard, I believe, has Wonder Woman moved? I believe that's gone.
Seems very likely to me.
Yeah, there's that one. Well, the two, it's Wonder Woman and Black Widow are the two remaining tentpoles for this year. And we've got Andrew Dickinson saying, do you see any films getting 1 billion ticket sales now from now on, as there are probably going to be very short runs due to the turnaround? The whole dynamic of what is a tentpole film now, and getting people into the cinemas, and the whole evolution of what I want to say the live experience of going to a cinema and enjoying a film. Is it beyond repair at this point?
Well, it's getting there. See, the real problem is that if you starve the theaters for too long, and you've got all of these consolidated theater chains, and you've got AMC and Regal and stuff like that, if they go out of business, all of the investments that have been made by them to scale of all of these screens and all of that gets lost. That's a very hard, once the locomotive comes to a screeching stop, the amount of additional energy that you need to get that up and running again may be insurmountable. I don't see anybody putting up billions of dollars to reinvest in a network of movie theaters if the one that we've already got goes under. So the fact that these guys are teetering, and the fact that the current upsurge almost guarantees any government jurisdiction that doesn't shut down public events like movie theaters is deeply irresponsible right now. No matter what the efforts they're taking on social distancing, those kind of things where you're sitting in a auditorium for two plus hours, with other people in an indoor space, just doesn't sit with what we're up against right now. So that's really precarious. If they can get through this, if the government step up with money and say, we're going to backstop your loans and investments so that you're not going to go out of business, then I think as soon as people are able to get back out in movie theaters, it's going to be the hottest ticket in town. You'll have trouble with shows getting under $1 billion because everybody's going to want to go out and do this thing that we haven't been allowed to do. But getting from here to there is the real problem. And you can see that these sort of makeshift efforts of Tenet, and the worst one, unfortunately, was New Mutants, which just kind of landed with a thud because they tried to release it. I suspect it might have been not that good in the first place. I haven't seen it, so it might have been a thing. It's like, we're just going to push this out the door, come what may. But
I think you can also pull up examples like Milan. I think you can pull up examples like Artemis Fowl. These were due to get big screen releases. They recognized that they weren't going to get the automatic 1 billion audience that would normally have just gone out, just as a reaction to just getting out there and enjoying a film of that scale on a screen.
When they lose their shirt like that, it hurts the stock price of the studio, and then it impedes their ability to raise money for the next blockbuster. So if you need $400 million to produce, procure talent, and market one of these blockbuster films in this environment, nobody's going to open their wallet for that, looking at what just happened, because the film industry is very conservative. They're very scared of anything that's not proven. And if all of the evidence that this is a sure thing vanishes, then that money is going to evaporate, and it's going to make it very hard for the pipeline going forward. So that means that in come 2024, 2025, when everything is ostensibly back to normal, that that bubble in the bloodstream is going to reach the brain, and we're going to have that aneurysm of no movies of any scale for a while. because all of the stuff that we did this year is piled up, and that's a delayed action effect.
I'm really curious as well, because I have not gone to a cinema. We've obviously had efforts here in the UK, social distancing, lots of cleanliness, real strong protective of their audience, doing their best to continue the business here in the UK. I'm certain in the US it's a very similar effort. I've been paying very close attention, and we've also had I've had comments and conversations with the likes of Mark Serby, who's obviously a strong defender and proponent of the cinema experience, and has reminded me that while we have seen super spreader events, while we have seen people going to birthday parties and the COVID has spread from those events, there's been no recognized instance of COVID being spread from a movie theater. I'm curious, do you think that the movie theaters or the cinema chains have not made enough promotional effort to get the message out that we are doing our absolute best to make this as safe as experience as possible? Or do you feel that they're just overwhelmed by the message of stay safe, stay home?
Look, it's against the grain to suggest it, and it's possible that they haven't had that many events because they're just not getting that many people. I mean, something like air travel. My wife was just flew down to Arizona to see her brother and sister a couple of days ago because of emergency circumstances. That was not discretionary travel. It was like the costs of not going exceed the cost of going. And so that's the calculation that you make for something that is a risky activity like getting on an airplane. But if you have a big screen TV in your house, or you've got, a VR headset here, you got some way that you can enjoy entertainment in the privacy of your home, the benefits of going out in a discretionary environment just seem to not be exceeded by the costs of it right now. I mean, people do it, but it's hard to justify.
Justify it, yeah. Okay. And I think then to wrap things up, because I don't want to keep too much of your Saturday, heaven knows, this being take two, we've already taken up a lot of your time, but I think we'll definitely talk about DC Comics, and we'll talk about the industry of the comics industry, in terms of how it's been affected, and also the reaction of these the companies. Obviously, the main or the headline grabbing effect has been the layoffs from DC Comics, the closing of Diamond, the shifting of distribution by some of the business. Which do you think has been the hardest aspect of the comics industry that has been struck? Is it a case of the talent that has now moved on to crowdfunding to get a direct connection with their audience? Is it the infrastructure of getting books out onto the shelves? Is it the shift from floppies to trade paperbacks because of the actual titles being pared down? It's a big question, but which do you think has been the biggest aspect of comics that have been hit and struck?
Look, I thought that the publishing side was precarious even before all of this happened, because there's too many publishers and too much new content coming into a market where there's no clear way that we've expanded demand considerably for adult-oriented periodical genre comics. All of the growth has been for kids and YA stuff, which is its own thing, and in the format of books and trade collections, as opposed to individual titles. So a lot of this, I think that we were due for a shakedown this year, that many of these promising companies that have put out really good content, like an Aftershock or Ahoy or Black Mask, or all of these companies that have come to the table with A-list talent, like great stuff, good ideas for books. Nobody's got the time to do all of that. So that was looking unsteady to me even before all of this happened. And the fact that we had an interruption in the serialization of the content, I think Todd McFarlane, who I interviewed in April about this, made a really good point that, you know, publishers of periodicals really need that cadence of, they need people coming in, buying the latest issue, talking about it, leaning forward and being into the story. And if you get them off that habit, if you break that routine, it's very hard to reestablish. So I think that a lot of people, like, I haven't read, since my local comic shop closed, I haven't read a lot of, you know, serialized comics at all. There's a couple of series that I was following a little bit that I'm kind of curious about that I'll check out digitally. But most of what I'm getting is when people send me trade paperbacks and stuff like that, or new graphic novels to review. And that's, you know, my experience may not be typical, but I think that part really hurts. And that having just the routines of the fan culture disrupted in a meaningful way is something that we're going to have a harder time coming back from, no matter what they do on the business side. Because one thing that comics have done a great job, comics big, you know, in the big sense, where we're including Scholastic and, you know, Abrams and the publisher, you know, First Second, these publishers that have been very good at bringing young readers in. What the young readers are reading is not serialized stuff. Like, they don't go into the comic shop week after week. They wait, you know, for the annual Dogman release, or they wait for the, you know, and all of it piles up in one place. Getting the people that started off reading Leighton and Felgenmeyer in the aughts and the early teens to become readers of serialized periodicals, there's no easy way to do that. There's no good bridge from the kind of content that they enjoyed as kids, unless it's manga and it's an ongoing series. But again, manga is its own thing, and it's separate from, you know, from the other side of the business also. So DC and Marvel are belatedly kind of getting on the train with this. And Marvel has struck up agreements with IDW for sort of middle years, sort of animated style stuff, and with Scholastic for early years and kids books based on Marvel licensing. But those deals are like 2 years old. So we're not seeing the fruits of that. DC has done a little bit better in that DC has always had a strong licensing program of their characters for kids. And there's publishers that specialize in doing sort of DC, you know, chapter books and kids books and stuff like that, with Superman and Wonder Woman and all of that. But again, they're kind of missing this stretch between if you're reading, you know, Swamp Thing Kid or you know, Swamp Kid, how does that then transition into turning that into a reader of Justice League Dark, right? I mean, I don't think that there's a really a smooth on ramp to get somebody that's like that's 11 or 12 and is aging out of their kids stuff into their mainstream books. And I think that DC's new leadership has recognized that their model for the last 40 years of cultivating this super intensive fan base that knows every jot and tittle of DC continuity has hit diminishing returns. And that moving forward, DC is the publisher of Batman, Harley Quinn, Batman, Watchmen, Batman, Suicide Squad, Batman, and Wonder Woman. That's what they publish. And, you know, that anything that's not in that set of stuff, did I mention Batman?
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, you know, is so incidental to their business that it's not worth doing anymore. And I think that the moves that they made on the personnel side reflect that. I don't think it's a bad business decision for them, but the fan in me, the old-time DC fan, is dying, because that's, to me, that part is DC. And Bleeding Cool ran a piece the other day about whereas Marvel is licensing their kids stuff and keeping their core brand being their adult-oriented Marvel Universe titles, that it would behoove DC to do the opposite. And if DC wants to be moving forward the publisher of media tie-ins and kids books, and that's what DC is, then it would seem to me to leave room to license out legacy DC Universe to a niche publisher like a Dynamite or you know, a Valiant, or somebody that has competency in the direct market with connected universe stuff and has the sort of, you know, gray-haired creators and fan base that will buy that stuff, But the problem is, at least according to the report that I saw, is that DC's cost for that license right now is prohibitively high, and nobody can make money on it. Which to me is a shame, because it's just leaving money on the table. Because I think there's fans that would continue to buy that. There's publishers that would be happy to put it out. There's creators that would want to work on it. And for the retailers, it would give them something to put on the shelves that their outside fans would like. That's not, you know, the super mainstream DC stuff that DC wants to focus on. So I hope they find a way to square that circle, because I think that would please the fans. It would solve their problem. It would give them free money. It would make the retailers happy. It would make the creators happy. So that to me looks like a good way forward for DC if they want to do it. I think right now they're in the mindset of, we just want to do what it takes to survive, and we don't want to bring additional hassles on ourselves. So like, screw that. And I know where they're coming from, but
I mean, you talked there very much about the DC umbrella. I want to just open up the bubble a little bit, and I don't want to sound craven about this, but do you think the age of COVID was an excuse for Warner and AT&T to do what they've been wanting to do anyway?
Oh, absolutely. I think
that preparing a lot of wood that they feel is dead wood out of the way.
I mean, I wrote a Forbes story last summer, having seen what happened to the DC booth at Comic-Con and reading the tea leaves then about where does DC fit in AT&T's strategy moving forward, where it seemed very clear to me that this was the smart move for them. That if the company is run by people that have absolutely no sentimental attachment to DC as anything other than what it is right now and what it could be as a moneymaker in the future, if you're just taking that very cold look at things, and you get rid of a Dan DiDio, and you get rid of all of these people that have that legacy attachment to old DC for reasons not business related, then this is the direction they were going to go. And I don't even think that they needed the excuse of COVID. I think they were. This is definitely what they were going to do anyway. And I feel really, really bad for all of those people that really dedicated their life to that idea of the company, that are now right before the holidays having to find a new job in this environment. So that's a rough one.
Sure. Well, I'll wrap it up with just a question that's come in from Andrew, and it kind of circles back round to comic conventions and DC. When losing their events manager, this is something that we were talking about just prior to us coming on air. Does it sort of signal that they may drop out of cons, or do they refill that role when cons reopen again? This is somebody whose name escapes me, but Rob knows. Is it? I will say Fletcher
Fuchong, I think.
Yeah.
Chufang.
I knew him to speak to, and I knew him literally as a face that was always at the DC booth, and was running around like a headless chicken, keeping a lot of plates being spun. Really did an incredible job on that booth. I think it's working back to that relationship with DC and its conventions again. The question, I suppose, it also then just asks, will we be seeing a DC booth at Comic-Con again, at San Diego Comic-Con again?
I mean, it just depends on what their goals are. I mean, it's a great opportunity for fan engagement. I think that they have to be there for programming, but whether the hassles and logistics of setting up a booth, that booth is $1 million booth. I mean, no two ways about it. And, staffing it and running all the talent through and all of that, like, what's the return on that investment? And that's the only question that AT&T is asking about this stuff, given how deeply in debt they are. They look at it and they say, okay.
Yeah, there's no heart there. There's no heart there. It's straight cold numbers.
Yeah, what are we getting for it? And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they, because DC never was terribly engaged in conventions. Only in the last year or two did they strike some deals with ReedPop to be more of an active presence. I think that the fact that Jim Lee is still at the company, that's their convention strategy. They're going to send Jim to every show and that's going to be DC. You know, and
Yeah.
for, I guess, for if you're a fan of what DC used to be, Jim is the only thing left. So there you go. That's what you get.
Well, I would have tacked onto that. Yeah, you send Jim Lee and Jeff Johns, but now Jeff Johns has signed a creator-owned with Image. That kind of says that someone's looking at the door and seeing a parachute to hand, that they can, in fact, find alternative methods of getting their stories out there.
DC lives on in the Jeff Johns TV universe. If you like DC in the 70s and 80s, watch Stargirl or watch The Flash or whatever. That's their thing.
Absolutely. Right, so we're going to let you get off. Thank you very much indeed for indulging me and coming back on for a take 2 of this particular episode. It's been a pleasure to have you on. The pieces that I've been showing up on screen are definitely worth checking out if you haven't read them yet. The ICV2 piece towards the post-COVID comics industry. It's a much better website than Forbes. It just gets on with what it's doing. No pop-up ads, and you can definitely dive into it. It's a very comprehensive piece on fandom and the ecology of what we can expect, reinventing conventions. It really is well worth checking out that piece on icv2.com. But I would also then point you towards the Forbes piece as well, because yeah, it's well worth checking out.
So Forbes has moved to a new model where if you subscribe to the site, you get a better site experience, I understand. It also helps me out. So go to my page at forbes.com, Rob Salkowitz, and you can, I think, sign up and you'll get notifications for new stuff that I've written there. I've got a couple of really cool pieces coming up. I've got a big feature on African comics industry, which is some really interesting stuff coming out of Nigeria and South Africa, and some new content that we haven't seen before, stuff like that. So if that interests you and you want to keep up with that, please do sign up for that. You can find me pimping for all of the stuff that I'm writing at Rob Salk on Twitter. Just look for me to pop up. I'm always happy to join you on these shows, Leonard. Thank you so much for having me. It's
a pleasure. Well, let's just bring that up on screen so people can see it. Rob Salk is definitely worth checking out. And like you say, the pieces that you've been doing have been in-depth, they've been comprehensive, and they've really, while there are some of us that want to have a very romantic nature about the industries that we enjoy, you have to kind of take a very close, not clinical, but very analytical look. And that's what you have been doing with your posts. And it's been very much appreciated by myself and other people who've been keeping a close eye on what's been going on in fandom. So thank you so much indeed. Rob, it's been a pleasure. Do take care and enjoy the rest of your weekend, sir.
Okay, thanks much. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Brilliant stuff. Do go check out those posts and check out the work of Rob Salkowitz, because he knows what he's talking about. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been a kind of drop-in episode to kind of fill in that gap of the technical issues on the Wednesday, but we are going to be back on Wednesday with another new show. And hopefully you can join us for that, considering that we've got ourselves some great guests coming up, not just on the Wednesday, but also the Sundays coming up. This Sunday, of course, we're talking to Scotty Young, which is an episode that I've been looking forward to very, very much indeed, as a very big fan of his work. But we're also going to be continuing our Wednesday shows with next week, talking to Cavan Scott. Excellent writer. He's got a couple of new projects on the cards. Really looking forward to talking to Cavan. We are going to be having another incidental episode next Saturday. Somebody who wanted to do something on a weekend, but we have got something booked for the Sunday. So he's agreed to come on to join us next week. That's Al Ewing, man who's been incredibly busy this summer, obviously with the creator-owned stuff that he's been doing for Image, but also we've got the Immortal Hulk, and of course that massive Empire event that he did for Marvel this year. Yeah, really looking forward to talking to Al, just to find out how on earth he's been spinning all of those plates. Mike Ciaccini is going to be joining us on Sunday, the 22nd of November. He's the editor-in-chief of Den of Geek. So you may not know Mike's name, but you definitely know the site. So definitely going to be talking to him. And by then, we may know more about what we can expect from Black Widow and also Wonder Woman 84. By the 22nd of November, I think it's safe to say we'll get a sense of how far and how reaching the damage has gone for the Christmas period, one of the core holiday periods for pop culture. We have got some people to talk to about the 25th of November, our Wednesday show. Keep your eyes open. Do follow me on Twitter, of course, on Englishman STCC. We'll announce our guests for the TBC episodes, but trust me, we've got some great names that are possibly lined up for that date. And then on the final one of this month, White Noise Studios, the chaps are going to be coming on en masse. Alex Packnadell, Ram V, Dan Waters and Rhino Sullivan, all of them are absolutely cooking with gas at the moment. If you haven't checked out Giga from Alex Packnadell, do it. But my God, he's got himself a book that's come out from TKO that came out, I believe, this week called Red Fork, which is him doing very possibly career best. All four of them are doing incredible work at the moment. White Noise Studios, it's going to be a great little catch-up as well, because I was there pretty much from the start, because I did an MCM Comic-Con panel with them when they just got the White Noise Studios name together. Let's look at this 2 years later and how they have gone from strength to strength. That's our shows. Hope you enjoyed today's. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on a little bit of a last-minute reprieve for our take 2 of the Wednesday show. From myself, Leonard, from Rob Salkowitz as well, do take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Head off and check out the Thought Bubble content, certainly on their YouTube channel, Thought Bubble Comics, all one word. Check it out on YouTube. Lots of great panel content they've been posting over the course of today, and there's more to come tomorrow as well. From me to you, take care. And I will see you on Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT, in conversation with Scotty Young. Take care.